Well, I'm trying to get all the technology off. Happy Pentecost. I'm glad that we are here. Half the church showed up. The other half, I think, is visiting virtually. It's a great thing. I'll never forget, it was 4 or 5 years ago. It too was the day of Pentecost, and we were here, just like we are today, reading the same version of the Acts of the Apostles. That day I saw come in late back there in the corner, right as we were reading this foreign language section. They took one look around, puzzled look on their face, heard what was going on, turned around and left. They left the building never to be seen again. Thankfully, that is not what happened on that first Pentecost. On that first Pentecost, empowered by the Holy Spirit, the disciples were given the gift of speaking the good news of Jesus Christ in the home languages of all the people who had gathered in Jerusalem. You see, Pentecost was a Jewish festival as well. The concluding festival of grain, the harvest, and the day of remembrance associated with the giving of the law to Moses on Mount Sinai. It was a festival that had all the people from all over the known world coming to Jerusalem. Now, if you want to know what that meant, think of it like this. The Summer Olympics will be in Tokyo on July 23rd this year, and all the people from all over the world will be gathering to cheer on their country. That's akin to all the diversity of languages represented in Jerusalem those 50 days after the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the day of Pentecost. And we know this as the birthday of the church because the people gathered, heard, and understood the good news of Jesus Christ. And they brought that good news home with them from all the four corners of the world when they did go home, when they left Jerusalem and went to the farther reaches of the world. But that's only how the church began. Over the centuries, the faithful, empowered by the Holy Spirit, continue to preach and teach the good news of Jesus Christ. Notice they weren't out saving. They weren't out doing anything but preaching and teaching and living the life that Jesus taught them, leaving the God stuff up to God. Some even died for making their proclamation. And yet somehow the church grew. It organized itself. Bishops, priests, deacons, and all the faithful baptized in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, embodied and empowered by that Holy Spirit, did the work of making Jesus known throughout the world. They told the story, and the hearers, with the Holy Spirit at work in them, got to do the rest. And the church grew. And I don't know what it is about organizations, people, sin maybe, but as the church grew, just like we saw with Judaism and the temple, that structure, people became more devoted to the institution of the church rather than the work of the church. What the Holy Spirit initially gave them that breath of life to go out and do. We became more concerned with our beautiful buildings, and they are pretty, aren't they? Rather than for the reason that these buildings exist. There's something about us human beings, isn't there? We get in our comfort zones, fiercely protecting what we know, and somehow our mission changes from the excitement of the new, led by the Holy Spirit, to just going through the motions of the old familiar patterns. We've become the church institution rather than the church following the Holy Spirit. I think of Ezekiel. Can these dry bones live, I wonder, going through the motions, bleached in the sunlight? When I was in my late 20s or 30s, I was at a church in Columbia, South Carolina, St. John's. The men of the church were important to my faith life. And at St. John's, the men were quite active in everything. I guess most of them were my age now. They seem so old. I'm young. We had a men's prayer breakfast. We attended and were engaged in Christian formation weekly. We had speakers come in and inspire us as we ate dinner. We did work days at the church. We cooked for church events. We had an oyster roast to raise money and cooked pancakes on Shrove Tuesday. That sounds familiar, I bet. We had a softball league. Heck, they taught me how and gave me the passion for flounder fishing and Jesus Christ. We were a very social bunch and extremely active in every aspect of the church. One year, though, I finally got an invitation. I've been waiting for years for this, but I got an invitation to that once-a-year swamp trip. This was a quasi-church event. Others were brought in, other men. From its origin, it was a trip with a handful of guys going out to the swamp to duck hunt the week before duck season ended in January. So even by South Carolina standards, it was cold. By the time I was invited, no one hunted anymore because they would have to get up too early, and they were my age. It was more about boating into the swamp, setting up camp, which consists of a tent about the size of the rectory. They went to a sail maker and had it all stitched together, a custom blue tarp tent that I'm sure could be seen from the moon as it was lit up at night. They had made a steel 4 foot by 4 foot fabricated burning stove to heat that tent. They had made in there also a kitchen, and 3 meals were served a day, prepared by the elders. There was clearly a hierarchy, and it quickly dawned on me why I was invited, that I might not have just been the charming company that they wanted. My invitation to the swamp was probably because of my age. Since I was a bit younger than most of these men, they just might have invited me to chop the wood, to feed that monster stove, and to do the dishes after all the meals. I tell you this to illustrate how anything that starts off good and fun can quickly change from what it was originally meant to do into what we would call an institution, whose goal is to perpetuate itself, love of self. Yes, I am sure these guys still have fun out there, but their purpose is long forgotten. They now exist for the food, for the company, the camp, the break from everyday life. And while there are many sacred cows, no one has seen a duck for decades. Sure, this all could be okay if you're a bunch of guys out in the swamp camping. But if you're the church, I'm not so sure. I wonder, can these dry bones live? Well, the answer is yes. If we mortals allow the breath of God to come into our lives, and if we do let God breathe life into us, the institution of the church works for us rather than the other way around. It empowers us to be efficient as we proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. Proclaim the good news. God saves. It challenges us to leave the security of these beautiful buildings and to stop playing church as we go out into the world and become the church. It will be exciting and it will be terrifying. And today, as we baptize Joseph Clayton Crawford as our church's newest member, my prayer is that we remember that this beautiful building that we are gathered in is just that, a building. The church, however, Christ's new body in this world, is so much more than a building. And its mission is to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ while letting the Holy Spirit show us new ways for people everywhere to hear and understand what the good news means in their lives. It is life-changing, exhilarating, exciting, and terrifying. I challenge all of you to let that Holy Spirit in, to do something that you're terrified to do. Leave these buildings. Go out and proclaim the good news through word and deed. We're coming out of this horrific virus. We're starting to gather back together as a church. We're going to soccer and baseball and grocery stores and hardware stores. We're doing all the things that we used to do. It's time to come back to church so that we can go out into the world. You ready to be baptized? Joseph, wake up. All right, let's do this.